Hello, I'm Bella May and welcome to part 3 about the making of Christine's Masquerade dress from the Phantom of the Opera. In the last 2 videos, I mentioned that the third part of the series would be about the hoop skirt and the petticoats. Well, I'm gonna be honest here. I am filming this and I need to release this video very soon, and the petticoats are not made yet. So I improvised my plans, and this video will just be about the hoop skirt. And next week's video will be about the petticoats. So there you go. But this hoop skirt was definitely a challenge, and I look forward to sharing the process with you. I am fairly happy with the results. It will definitely work for this project, quite well actually. So I am so excited to go on to the skirt part of this dress, which includes the petticoats and making that outer layer. And I'm so excited to finally get cutting and such into that silk taffeta I purchased for the outer dress. So hoop skirt is finished finally. This hoop skirt did take a lot longer than I anticipated. I kept saying I'm going to finish it today, and then I would get into that process of doing whatever I needed to do and realized it took way longer than I expected. So it's been in the works for several months now, but it is finished. And I will mention some of the aspects to the hoop skirt were not planned. I did not plan on doing them the way I did them, but sometimes you gotta get creative to achieve a result that you're looking for. And that's what happened with this hoop skirt, and I'm okay with it. So I hope you enjoy watching the process of making this hoop skirt, and I will see you next week with the petticoat part. So the process of designing this hoop skirt was to just play around with the boning and the twill tape. I am using 1/8 inch boning, and I purchased 65 yards of this, and I ended up using about all of that. You might notice the little picture I have pulled up on my iPad. I am basing my hoop skirt design off of this pictured hoop skirt. It's a hoop skirt in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I'll put the link to that down below. The first step to playing around with this twill tape and boning felt a bit weird because you just don't have the structure of all the different hoop wires together, so it just feels really floppy and weird. And that's why this beginning part of the design process, it kind of just looked weird. But as I got more boning attached and such, I was able to play around with the structure more, and I got a better feel as to what I was actually doing to create this shape. So this time lapse does go on for quite some time, and I will mention that when this time lapse ends, it is not the final design. I spent a lot of hours on this, and it would probably be an hour time lapse if I showed all of it, but this time lapse itself is pretty close to what the final design is, but at the same time it isn't. Kind of confusing, but I just played around with the different placements of the hoop and the twill tape and ended up with a design that you will see at the end of this video. So I am just pinning all this stuff in place, and after I designed it, I needed some way to record this design, and so I just measured between the twill tape placement and the boning, how much boning was in between there, and a bit complicated to explain, but basically I took a bunch of measurements so I could make sure that I could replicate this, because I did need to take this all apart to actually construct it. So I purchased quite a few yards of twill tape, and this is 3/8 inch twill tape. I wanted to create casing for the boning. And I really wanted to purchase boning that was already encased with cloth of some sort, but I couldn't find this fine of boning and casing anywhere. So I decided to make my own. And this did take quite a bit of time, much more than I expected. In the end, I think the covered boning definitely looks really nice. But basically what I'm doing is folding the twill tape in half and then using a very small zigzag that encases both those edges of the twill tape. With the zigzag, one side is falling into the twill tape and the other side is falling off the twill tape. So now I need to insert all my boning into these channels. First, I rounded the corners. So the boning casing is pretty small. It barely has enough room for that boning to go into, so it definitely took some maneuvering and such to get it in place. As you can see, I'm using a glove because even with the glove, I got blisters at the end of this process. So I was happy to actually have the glove to use. That probably saved my hands from a bunch of blisters. So once I got that boning covered, this is the process of reconstructing my design. So as I mentioned earlier, I took all those measurements, and now was the time to use those measurements to place the boning and the twill tape correctly. As you can see, I'm pinning it again. And the reason I decided to do this is just to be sure that I wasn't setting in stone, so to speak, my design measurements and such, just in case I got some wrong or I pinned it incorrectly or whatever. I decided to pin it again together, and then I could make some small adjustments and tweaks to the design if needed, and then I'd actually set it in stone, so to speak. Now that process did take some time to get all that pinned in place, but after I made some tweaks and such, it was finally time to get this all attached securely and permanently together. So with the boning ends, which are at the front, I basically created a sandwich with those loose ends in the middle and then the two edges of the boning on one side or the other. And then I did some sewing which connected all these layers together. Once those ends were secured, I now needed to turn my hoop skirt right side out, because right now it is actually inside out. With the way that I got it all pinned in place, my boning is on the outside, but in the final design, the boning needs to be on the inside of that twill tape. So I'm just turning it inside out, and I definitely received several scratches from all the pins that are keeping this hoop skirt together right now. But once I got that turned inside out, now we can go on to securing this boning to the twill tape. I am using 1/4-inch studs to secure this boning in place, and you will find the link for them down below. And then I found some pliers. They have a plastic tip that will help grip these studs and help close those prongs in on the boning. I'm doing a little test placement so that you can clearly see how I use these studs. So I first bend the prongs in just slightly so that they fit fairly close to the boning. And now I grab my pliers and I place them at an angle like this. So one is gripping that top part of the stud and the other part of the plier is gripping that bottom prong. So I've got kind of an angle going on with my pliers. And then you basically just squeeze, and then I do the same step on the opposite side. It did take some practice to actually be able to securely attach these prongs. The boning is pretty slippery, and so you can see here it is kind of wiggling around the boning. You kind of have to play with the pliers and the studs to get them to really securely grip that boning and keep it in place. Because if you have a bunch of loose studs keeping this hoop skirt together, well, that would just be a very bad disaster. So once the about 550 studs were securely in place, yes, that many, that was a lot. Anyway, after those were all done, it was now time to get on to the finishing touches of the hoop skirt, which actually took a lot longer than I anticipated. I'm now going to secure these ends. As you can see, they don't make a circle around the hoop skirt. And so I have this second piece of fabric in here that have these ties right in line with the boning. So to secure these ends, I tucked that extra boning casing amount in between these two pieces of large twill tape, and then I got everything pinned in place, and then I attached some more studs. And on this outer one, to the blunt edge, I am going through both layers of the twill tape, plus wrapping around that boning. Right now, the boning is in between two layers of twill tape, and this stud right here is going through both the twill tape and wrapping around the boning. Now on this outer edge, since I have that extra amount of boning casing, I am only going through one layer of the twill tape, and then the stud wraps around both the end of the boning and that extra casing bit, if that makes sense. Once that was all done, more studs in place, I'm now going to sew both edges of these two pieces of twill tape together. So I did just a basic whip stitch around these edges. When I came to that boning end, I'm now sewing across the twill tape. And this is really just to keep that placement of that boning end in place. So there has to be some sort of structure to keep the back of the hoop skirt in the back. After playing around with it some, these are the three things that I decided to use. So first off, a pillow, and then some fabric that wraps around and will lace in the back. And then a third thing are these strings that connect at these spots. So it looks like the strings in the back would actually push the front forward, if that makes sense, but they actually don't. With the angle I have on those strings and where they're attached, it's actually pushing the front of the hoop skirt back, and at the same time, that's pushing the back of the hoop skirt up a bit. So this is the pillow. I have a larger piece and then a smaller piece. The smaller piece is going to be the underside of the pillow, and the larger is going to be the top part. So I'm just pinning these together and pleating the corners to take in that extra fullness that the top piece of the fabric has. So once I had those two pieces together, I went ahead and sewed it together, and then I turned it right side out and put some pleats along the top edge of both pieces. Now time to fill it. So I am stealing some sawdust, shavings, whatever you want to call them, from my dad's workshop, and I just filled it full with wood shavings. That's what the pillow is full of. With how dusty the shavings were, I did decide to make a second bag, so to speak, for this pillow, and I didn't pleat the top this time so that I could get that other bag of shavings in it. And then I pleated that edge and then bound it with a piece of twill tape. The twill tape is basically just to secure those raw edges of the two bags of the pillow. Before I go on to the other two aspects of the push-up part of the hoop skirt, I'm going to finish the waistband. For my closure on the waistband, I decided to use some grommets and lacing. This way I can have a flexible waist measurement with this hoop skirt. Once the grommets were securely placed in the waistband, I'm now going to move on to the back lacing part of this push-up part of the hoop skirt. This is my pattern piece, and I'm going to pleat this area right here. I'm now going to just sew around the edges, leaving that back edge where I'm going to pleat open so I can turn it right side out and press it. And then with that final raw edge, I'm turning it in about an inch, and this will give a nice secure place where I'm going to place grommets. But I'm just turning those raw edges in onto itself and doing a top stitch to secure them both together. I'm now placing those pleats at the back. This is the center back of this lacing place. This is also going to be where the grommets will lie. These pleats are to allow the extra width of my hips. Now's the time to place the grommets, and after that's done, we can attach it to the hoop skirt. These lacing pieces are going to attach to this front section of the hoop skirt where all those ends are, and then the lacing will wrap around the back. And I just got it pinned in place and then hand sewed all of that. I'm now going to attach these strings to the structure of the hoop skirt. So I make a loop with the twill tape. I'm just using 3/8 inch twill tape. I make a loop, stick it through that piece of boning, stick the ends through, and then I'm now pulling them, and I'm going to attach them to this front part of the hoop skirt. And it's the last step of the process, attaching the pillow to the waistband of the hoop skirt, which it was a little bit of a challenge to get all that bulk around, but I managed because I did not want to hand sew this in place. So after all my design process of trying to get a very large back, I also achieved a very flat front. I, of course, wanted a flat front, but in the end, it's even more flat than I was thinking, but it still works. And then I also will mention that when I walk, the hoop skirt does bounce a little bit, and that makes the back part of the hoop skirt hit the ground kind of in a bouncing pattern, which annoys me a little bit, but at the same time, I'm okay with it and it'll be fine. So there you have it, the construction and design process of making this elliptical hoop skirt, and let me know what you think. Personally, I think it turned out quite well for the purpose of it, to get that really nice large back to the hoop skirt, well, to the dress. So the hoop skirt definitely needed to have that shape. One thing I knew is that the petticoats did not make up a majority of that back. At least I'm fairly certain. That would have to be a lot of petticoats, and I felt like this dress in particular didn't have a huge amount of petticoats. So I knew that a lot of the volume in that back needed to be the hoop skirt, and so that was my main goal in designing this hoop skirt, was that large back. I think the finished result will do that the way it's supposed to. I'm not sure the process in which I created that large back part was 100% historically accurate. Mainly those strings that I put in the back. I don't know if those strings explanation made sense, but I kind of just played around with it, and those seem to help push the back. So I don't know if that's historically accurate to do that. I have seen the pillow and that lacing back to keep the back in the back used before in historical hoop skirts and such. So that's why I decided to do those two things. The string part, I don't know, but I got creative and I'm okay with that. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you next week with the petticoats. If you happen to miss the last two videos in the series, that link will pop up and they're also in the description. And with that, be sure to leave a comment and a like. And if you aren't already, hit that red subscribe button and join me on this sewing journey. And a huge thank you to the patrons who have joined me in this journey and have been so helpful along the process. And so thank you, patrons. And if you're interested about what a patron is, you'll find that link down below. As always, go out into your own sewing area and learn, create, and inspire.